your hat brim is broken.
Why, so it is. And I'm plumb glad about it too. Keeps the sun out of my eyes better this way.
How nice to see you, Mrs. Durgan. You're looking well.
Thank you, Pastor Mullen. That was quite a windstorm we had the other night, wasn't it?
It certainly was. It took the roof clean off my house.
Oh my, I'm so sorry to hear that.
Oh no, I'm really rather glad it did. You see, we needed more sunlight in the living room, and now we've got it.
Fred, how are you this morning?
I am right well, Miss Monique. Oh, I heard about your terrible accident over at the beauty parlor the other day.
Oh, it was nothing, but it's toi.
Not the way I heard it. I heard the new girl cut off a little bit more than you bargained for.
Yes, perhaps, but I'm really rather glad she did, you see?
You're glad about it?
Mais oui. Now I don't have to comb my hair in the morning. I'm hardly ever late to work.
Hi, my name is Jimmy Bean, or Jimmy Bean Pendleton now. Sometimes I forget that I've got a new name. Looking around this town, you might think that these folks have always been mighty glad sort of folks, but that isn't all true. It wasn't long ago that this town was suffering pretty bad. It was suffering from what most people are suffering from in most all other places, and that is a terrible lack of gladness and a terrible heap of sorriness. Seems that everyone was going around full of sorriness for themselves. No one knew anything about how to be glad. Not Miss Snow, not Nancy, nor Mr. Pendleton, and particularly not Miss Polly Harrington. It all started when Pollyanna came to stay. Poor Miss Harrington, she had no idea what she was in for. Or else, she might have never agreed to do her duty. Well, that's what she called it at least.
Fire and brimstone. Fire and brimstone. Fire and brimstone!
Of course, this all had to happen on Mrs. Durgan's day off. Yes, ma'am. I don't know how I'm expected to get everything ready in one day. This is most inconvenient.
Well, we got the room all ready for her at least. But you know, Miss Harrington, it gets awfully hot way up there in the attic. Couldn't we give her a room
Just
down?
open the windows, Nancy.
I did, but now the room's full of flies.
I've ordered window screens to be made. Until then, keep the windows shut. The heat will kill off the flies and you can sweep them out in the morning. Oh, hello, Pastor Malden.
Oh, good afternoon, Miss Harrington. Miss Nancy.
Have you had a chance to think over what we discussed at our last meeting?
As a matter of fact, I was just sitting here reading the passages that you recommended.
Splendid. Those are some of my favorite verses, you know.
Are they?
Our last pastor used them nearly every Sunday.
God rest his soul.
Well, you see, I have been giving it a lot of thought, and I believe I have come to a conclusion. You see, the idea of...
I'm sorry, Pastor Malden. I can't discuss this with you right now.
Are you all right, Miss Harrington?
It's just that I find myself quite distracted at the moment. You see, I just received word that my niece's father has passed away.
You have a niece, Miss Harrington? I did not know that you had
And
it.
since I am the child's only living relative, it is my duty to take her in and bring her up properly.
What about the child's mother? Hasn't she got a mother?
Her mother was my eldest sister, Ginny. Ginny died 9 years ago.
Oh, I'm so very sorry. It must have been especially hard on the little girl's father.
Oh, he had a great deal of help raising the child. The Ladies' Aid Society from the church all pitched in. Ginny and he were missionaries in a little chapel out west.
Ah, a man of the cloth.
and a rather tattered cloth it was. It lived out of missionary barrels filled with second-hand clothing and worthless cast-off goods.
How very sad.
Oh, not to their way of thinking. He convinced her the whole thing was a great adventure.
There was a time when I once thought the same thing.
My sister could have done so much better. Lord knows she had a wealthy enough suitor right here in town.
So, why didn't she marry the wealthy suitor?
My point exactly. I'll never forgive that man.
No, that's not what I meant.
And the result is the world has another orphan. But I know my duty.
That poor little girl.
And the child's name? What is the little girl's name?
Her name is Pollyanna.
Named for you, Miss Harrington.
A ridiculous name, named for my late sister Anna and myself. Pollyanna. A ridiculous name.
Nancy, is Miss Harrington the child's only living relative that she can stay with?
I'm afraid so, Pastor.
Well, I'd say things are about to change in the Harrington household.
Let's hope so, Pastor.
Nancy, I require your assistance.
Let's hope so.
All passengers disembark at Beldingsville, Vermont. All passengers, Beldingsville, Vermont. Beldingsville.
This is where I get off. I'm going to live with my Aunt Polly. I never met my Aunt Polly, but you know, that's what makes me so glad. It will be such a surprise to meet her, and I know she'll be very glad to meet me too. She hasn't got any children of her own, and now I haven't gotten any parents. But that makes us both orphans in a way, don't you think? I know I'll be very glad to meet my Aunt Polly. Father says that she has a comfortable house with lots of rooms. That's what heaven's like, you know? Lots of big houses with lots of rooms. That's where my father is now, and my mother too. They're both heavenly angels.
I have a small home myself.
Well, that's something to be glad for.
A small home?
Well, sure. Having a small house is ever so much easier. Father and I lived in a small house, and there was nothing to it when it came time to cleaning it up. We just made up the sofa each morning and washed up the breakfast things. Ladies' Aid Society brought us our dinner each night, and Father and I put away the dishes. We had more time for stories that way. Father always read me stories.
Huh.
Did your father read you stories too?
My father never read me a story in his life. I don't think he even knew how to read.
Well, then you have a great deal to be glad about.
Be glad that my father couldn't read.
Well, sure. Just think of all the stories that you have yet to read. There must be hundreds that you've never even heard before, like Jonah and the whale, Daniel and the lions, and maybe even about Noah and his big old ark. That should make anyone glad.
What do you know anyway? You're just a little kid.
Well, what do you know about anything? You're just an old bro.
How do you do, sir? Isn't this a nice day?
Did you just speak to me?
Yes, sir. I say it's a nice day, isn't it?
Oh, Tom. I think that was mean of Miss Harrington to send me and not come herself.
That's just her way, Miss Nancy. I've gotten used to it over the years. You will too.
Oh, I hope not. Now, the telegram said to look for a red checkered dress and a small hat. Keep your eyes peeled so we don't miss the poor thing. Oh, heavens be praised, there she is. Come on, Tom. Are you Miss Pollyanna Whittier?
Oh, I'm so glad to see you. Of course I'm Pollyanna, and I'm so glad you came to meet me. I had hoped you would.
You did?
Yes, I've been wondering all the way here what you look like, and now I know. And I'm so glad you look just how you do.
This is Tom.
Oh yes, I do. A brand new one that the ladies they bought for me. And wasn't it lovely of them when they so much wanted to buy a carpet for the church instead? Of course, I don't know how much carpet a trunk could buy, but it ought to buy some anyhow. As much as half an aisle, don't you think? I've got a trunk check here. I'm supposed to give it to you so we can go get my trunk. Here it is.
Here, you just give that to old Tom.
Yes, sir, here you go.
I can't get over how much like your mother you are, little miss. I used to know her when she was even littler than you be.
You knew my mother? Really? When she was just a little earth angel and not a heavenly one? Oh, please tell me about her. I want to know everything.
There'll be plenty of time for that. Tom needs to be getting out your trunk, and I need to be getting you home to meet your aunt.
You mean you aren't my auntie?
Oh, no. I never thought you were taking me for her. And we ain't a bit alike, either. No, we ain't.
But who are you? You don't look a bit like a lady's aider.
Ladies, eh? I'm Nancy, the hired girl.
Oh, that's a real pretty name, Nancy.
Oh, it really isn't. It isn't. It's just a plain old name. Nothing fancy like Clarissa Maybell or Florabelle Estelle.
Well, I like it just fine because it's you. Anyhow, you can be glad it isn't Hephzibah.
Hephzibah?
Yes, Mrs. White's name is that, and her husband calls her Het. She does not like it. She says that when he calls out, hat, hat, she feels just as if the next minute he was going to yell, hurrah! And she does not like to be hurrahed at.
Well, if that don't beat all. Say, I shan't ever hear plain old Nancy again without thinking of that hep story and giggle. My, I guess I am glad.
So if you're just plain Nancy and not my Aunt Polly, I wonder, is there an Aunt Polly?
You bet your life there is.
Oh, I am glad of that. And do you know, I'm glad after all that she didn't come to meet me. Because now, I've still got her coming and I've got you besides.
I call that a pretty slick compliment. Why don't you thank the little lady?
Oh, yes, of course. I thank you for that compliment, Miss Pollyanna. Shall we go now? You're going to want to see your new home.
And my dear, dear Aunt Polly.
Yes, and your dear, dear Aunt Polly.
Mrs. Durgan? Mrs.
Yes, Miss Harrington.
Nancy and the child are due to arrive any moment. Is the room prepared?
Yes, ma'am. We shut the windows this morning and swept out the flies.
Just make sure to keep them shut until the window screens arrive. Flies carry a multitude of diseases.
Yes, ma'am. Will there be anything else?
Yes, Mrs. Durgan. I have made out a schedule for the child's education. Both you and Nancy will take part in teaching her how a household is to be managed. She will be learning mathematics and English grammar from a private tutor. And I've employed a classical piano teacher who will be instructing
Oh,
her.
Aunt Polly! Oh, Aunt Polly, do at last! I don't know how to be glad enough that you let me live with you in your beautiful, beautiful home.
How do you do? Please be good enough to come around in front of me and stand erect in a proper manner so I can have a look at you.
Well, I'm not very much to look at, on account of freckles.
You have a trunk, I assume?
Oh yes, indeed, Aunt Polly, a brand new one that the ladies had bought for me. I haven't got so very much in it, of my own I mean, but there were all of Father's books. Mrs. White said she thought I had to have Father's books on account of that Father.
Young lady, there is one thing that must be understood right away, and that is, I do not care to have you speaking of your father to me.
Why, Aunt Polly? I don't know what you mean.
Nancy will take you upstairs to your room.
I reckon I'm glad you don't want me to talk about Father. It would be easier for me, maybe, if I don't talk about him. Probably, anyhow, that's why you told me not to talk about him.
Tom will take your trunk up to your room. I shall be up in half an hour to look over your things. Any piece of clothing that is not suitable to be worn, I shall give to the orphans' home, of course.
I'm afraid you'll think they're worse than the ladies' aid did, and they said they were shameful. Did you ever have to dress out of a missionary barrel, Aunt Polly? Oh, of course. course not. I forgot. Rich folks never have to have them. How awfully glad you must be to be rich.
I'm surprised at you making a speech like that to me.
Why, Aunt Polly, aren't you? Aren't you awfully glad you're rich?
Certainly not. I hope I could not so far forget myself as to be sinfully proud of any gift the Lord has seen fit to bestow on me. Certainly not of riches.
Well, then you couldn't know that it was the hardest to play the game with the missionary barrels.
I wouldn't know a thing of that. Mrs. Durgan, I will have my tea in the library. Nancy, show the child to her room. As I said, I shall be up in half an hour to inspect your belongings. Please have your things unpacked by then.
I don't think Aunt Polly knows how to play the game.
Well, Miss Harrington ain't the game-playing sort, just in case you haven't noticed. What game are you speaking of, child?
The glad game. We began the game on some crutches that came in a missionary barrel.
Crutches?
Yes, you see, I had wanted a doll, and Father had written them so. But when the barrels came, the lady wrote that there hadn't any dolls come in, but the little crutches had. So she sent them along as they might come in handy for some child sometime, and that's when we began it.
Well, I don't see any game in that.
Oh, the game was just to find something about everything to be glad about, no matter what it was, and we began right then.
Well, I don't see anything about being glad when you got crutches, but what you wanted was a doll.
There is! I couldn't see it either at first, and that's why I cried. Father had to tell me. Oh, I spoke of Father again. But it was him who had to tell me what was to be glad about the crutches.
Well, then suppose you tell me.
Why, just be glad you don't need them. It's just that easy when you know how.
Of all the queer doings.
But it's not queer at all. It's lovely. And lots of times now, I think of it without even trying. Only, sometimes it's almost too hard. Like when Father goes to heaven, and there isn't anyone but the Ladies' Aid left.
Oh, you poor lamb. Well, let's get you up to your room, or Miss Harrington will have my hide. And I'll tell you right now, there won't be anything glad about that.
Oh yes, I'm glad I'm going to have my very own room. Is it as lovely as everything else in this heavenly house? Are there pictures on the walls and carpets on the floor? Oh, I just love carpets.
No, miss. No carpets. And no pictures. Not even a looking glass.
I'm sure it's going to be a very nice room. And I could be glad there isn't any looking glass. For where there isn't any looking glass, I can't see my freckles.
Yes, Miss Pollyanna. Follow me.
It was just like Pollyanna to find something in that little room to be glad about. After seeing a view just outside her window, she decided she was glad there weren't any pictures on the wall, because the pretty pictures in her window were more than enough. From up in her room, she looked down on Old Tom's vegetable garden, and past the fence, she'd even see some snow up on the mountains, way off in the distance. So she had a hard time keeping those windows shut. Miss Harrington was mighty shook up when she saw the flies in the house, though, on account of all those germs. Miss Harrington got Pollyanna on a regular schedule of educating. She was taking music lessons, and Mrs. Durgan was teaching about cooking, but what Pollyanna liked most was running errands into town with Nancy, because sitting and visiting and teaching folks the glad game was what Pollyanna liked more than anything else in the whole world.
Woe unto you. Woe unto you. Woe unto you!
Look, there's Pastor Malden. Good morning, Pastor Malden.
Good afternoon, my dear. Don't you look just fine in those bright new clothes your Aunt Polly bought you? Just like the little lady that you are.
Thank you very much, I'm sure.
You remind me of one of old Tom's sunflowers this morning. Bright and pretty and growing taller every day.
Am I really getting taller?
Well, we've been feeding you 3 times a day regular for pretty much a month now. And all that food's gotta be going somewhere.
I am glad of that. The bigger I get, the more errands I can do for you and Mrs. Durgan. Like taking this castor jelly to Mrs. Snow.
Ah, you're taking jelly to Mrs. Snow. Just yesterday, my wife brought her some chicken.
Does she like chicken?
I'm not sure. She did mention she would have rather had lamb broth. You can never really tell with Mrs. Snow. Well, anyway, if you'll excuse me, ladies, I have a sermon to write for Sunday, and I believe a nice inspirational walk in the woods alone is in order.
See you later then.
I'm sorry to be tucking off this job to you, Pollyanna.
But I'd love to do it, Nancy.
Well, you won't after you've done it once.
Why not?
Well, because nobody does. If folks didn't feel so sorry for her, there wouldn't be a soul go near her from morning to night. She is that cantankerous. All is, I pity her daughter Millie, who has to take care of her.
But why, Nancy?
Well, in plain words, there's just nothing that ever happens that happened in Miss Snow's eyes. Not even the days of the week were under her mind. If it's Monday, you're pretty sure to hear her say she wished it was Sunday. And when you brought her jelly, you're bound to hear her say she wanted chicken. Yeah, chicken. And if you brought her chicken, then she'd be hankering for lamb broth.
Why, what a funny woman.
Well, I gotta be getting these groceries off to Mrs. Durgan. And when we're both done, we'll meet at this here bench.
Yes, Nancy, I'll be waiting right here like you said. I know my duty.
You're starting to sound more like your Aunt Polly every day.
Why, thank you. Tisn't quite as nice as yesterday, but it's pretty nice.
See here, child. Who are you and why are you speaking to me every day?
I am Pollyanna Whittier, and I thought you looked lonesome. I'm glad you stopped. Now we're introduced. Only, you didn't do it right. You're supposed to tell me your name now.
Well, of all the...
How do you do, Mrs. Snow? I'm from Miss Polly Harrington, and I was just coming to your house.
What for?
Because I'd like to see Mrs. Snow.
Well, if that's true, you're the first one that ever liked to see her.
Keep that young'un away from me, Millie! She's likely to be carrying the influenza!
I don't think it's the influenza she's carrying, Mother.
How do you do, Mrs. Snow? Aunt Polly says she hopes you're comfortable today and she sent you some jelly.
You see, it's jelly.
Oh, dear me. Jelly? Well, of course I'm very much obliged, but I was hoping 'twould be lamb's broth today. Why, I thought it was chicken you wanted when we brought you jelly. What? It's just that Nancy said it was chicken you wanted when we brought you jelly, and lamb broth when we brought you chicken. But maybe it was the other way around and Nancy forgot. Well, Miss Impertinence, who are you? Pertinence? Oh, that's not my name, Mrs. Snow. And I'm glad it isn't too. That would be worse than Hephzibah, wouldn't it? What are you snickering about?
I just find Miss Pollyanna very amusing.
Well, she's not here to amuse you. She's come to visit with me and to bring you some jelly. Oh, yes, very well, thank you. Your aunt is very kind, of course, but my appetite isn't very good this morning, and I was wanting lamb. I never slept a wink last night. Not a wink. Oh dear, I wish I didn't. It was such an awful lot of time sleeping, don't you think? Lose time sleeping? Yes, when you might just be living, you know? It seems such a pity we can't live nights too. Well, if you ain't the amazing young one. Here, see my freckles, won't you? Just when I was being so glad you couldn't see them. There, now you can. Oh, I'm glad you wanted to see me, because now I can see you. They didn't tell me you were so pretty.
Me, pretty?
Why, yes, didn't you know?
Well, no, I didn't.
Oh, but your eyes are so big and dark, and your hair is all light too, and curly. Oh, I just love blonde curls. And you've got 2 little red spots on your cheeks. Why, Mrs. Snow, you are so pretty. I should think you'd know it when you looked at yourself in the glass.
The glass? Yes, well, I ain't done much frickin' before the mirror these days. And you wouldn't either if you was as sickly as I am.
Why, no, of course not. Well, wait, let me show you. I reckon I might fix your hair a little before I let you see it. May I fix your hair, please?
Well, I suppose so if you want to, but 'twon't stay, you know.
Oh, thank you. I just love to fix people's hair. I shan't do much of it today, of course, because I'm in such a hurry for you to see how pretty you are. But someday, I'm going to take it all down and have a perfectly lovely time with it. There, now I reckon we're ready to be looked at.
Humph! I like red flowers better than pink ones. But then it'll fade anyhow before night, so what's the difference?
I should think you'd be glad they'd fade, because then you could have the joy of getting some more. I just love your hair all fluffed out like that, don't you?
Maybe still. 'Twon't last, you know, with me tossing back and forth on the pose I do. Sick all of my days.
Why, it would be kind of hard to do it then, wouldn't it?
Do what?
Be glad about things.
Be glad about things when you're as sickly as I am? Well, I should say it would. If you don't think so, just tell me something to be glad about, that's all.
Oh, goody, this will be a hard one, won't it? But it's all the more fun when it is hard. Oh, I've got it.
Did you really? Well, what is it?
Well, I was just thinking that you could be glad that other folks weren't like you, all sick like this all the time.
Well, really? Take me home, Millie, now!
I think that's a very glad thought, Mother.
You would. What do you suppose she meant by that anyway? That little thing sure does have enough of hair, though, no mistake. I declare. I didn't know it looked so pretty, but then, what's the use?
Don't you like being a minister?
Don't I like? Why, what an odd question. Why do you ask that, my dear?
Nothing, only the way you looked. It reminded me of my father. He used to look like that sometimes.
Did he?
Yes, and I used to ask him just as I did you, if he was glad he was a minister.
Well, what did he say?
Oh, he said he always was, of course, but most always, too. He said that he wouldn't stay a minister a minute longer if it wasn't for the rejoicing text.
The what?
The rejoicing text. The Bible didn't name them that, of course, but it's all those that began with rejoice in the Lord, or shout greatly, or be glad in the Lord. Such a lot of them. Once, Father felt especially bad. He counted them. There were 800.
800?
Yes, that told you to rejoice and be glad, you know?
Oh, and so your father liked these rejoicing texts?
Yes, he said if God took the trouble to tell us 800 times to rejoice and be glad, he must want us to do it some. Don't you think so, Pastor Malden?
800?
That's how many he counted.
If you'll excuse me, my dear, I believe I have some counting to do.
How do you do, sir? The sun has certainly come out nicely this morning.
See here, little girl. We might just as well settle this thing once and for all. I've got something besides the weather to think of. I don't care whether the sun shines or not.
No, sir, I thought you didn't. That's why I told you.
Yes, well. What?
I say that's why I told you. So you would notice it, you know, that the sun shines and all that. I knew you'd be glad it did if you'd only stop to think of it. And you didn't look a bit as if you were thinking of it.
Well, of all the... See here, why don't you find someone your own age to talk to?
I'd like to, sir, but there aren't very many around here, Nancy says. Still, I don't mind so very much. I like old folks just as well, maybe better. Being used to the ladies' aid, so.
The ladies' aid? Is that what you took me for?
Oh, no, sir. You don't look a bit like a ladies' aider. Not that you're not just as good, of course. Maybe better. You see, I'm sure you're much nicer than you look.
Well, of all the... Perhaps you'd like to know, I have noticed the sun shining today.
But you don't need to tell me. I know you know it now. I can see it in your eyes and in your smile.
Impertinence.
Benign means not pertinence. It's Pollyanna. People sure do mix me and that pertinence girl up an awful lot.
Sakes alive, Miss Pollyanna. Did that man just speak to you?
Why, yes, he always does now.
He always does. Goodness. Do you know who he is?
I reckon not. You see, I did my part of the introducing, but he didn't.
But he doesn't speak to anybody, child. He hadn't for years. Well, I guess, except when he has to, for business and all that. He's John Pendleton. He lives up all alone on the big house on Pendleton Hill. He doesn't even have anyone around to cook for him. Comes down to the hotel 3 times a day for his meals. I know Sally Miner who waits on him, and she said he barely even opens his head enough to tell her what he wants to eat. She has to guess more than half the time, only she knows it'll be something cheap. She knows that without no telling.
I know, you have to look for cheap things when you're poor. Father and I took meals out sometimes, but we had beans and fish balls most generally. We used to say how glad we were that we liked beans. Does Mr. Pendleton like beans?
Like him? What if he does? Or he don't? Oh, Miss Pollyanna, he ain't poor. He's got loads of money, John Pendleton has, from his father. There ain't nobody in town who's richer than him. Why, he could eat dollar bills and not even know it.
As if anyone could eat dollar bills and not know it, Nancy, when they come and try to chew them.
Oh, I mean, he's rich enough to do it. He just ain't spending his money as all. He's saving it.
Oh, for the heathen! How perfectly splendid. That's called denying yourself and taking up your cross. I know, Father told me so.
Well, some says he's crazy, and some just cross, and some say he's got a skeleton in his closet.
How could he keep such a dreadful thing? I should think he'd throw it away.
And everyone says he's mysterious. Some years he just travels, week in and week out. And it's always in heathen countries, like Egypt and Asia, or the desert of Sahara, you know.
Oh, a missionary.
Well, I didn't say that. When he comes back, he writes books. Odd, queer books, they say, about some gimcrack he found in them heathen countries. He just doesn't ever want to spend no money here. Leastways, not just for living.
Well, no, of course not, if he's saving it for the heathen. But he is a funny man, and he's different too. Just like Mrs. Snow. Only he's a different.
Well, I guess he is, rather.
I'm gladder ever now that he does speak to me.
Well, you just keep on being glad, child, because sometimes it's just mighty hard to figure.
You'll get better at the game too, the more you play it. That's how it works.
If you say so.
I do say so.
It's just mighty hard to figure most times.
But you must also find that your time spent in educational endeavors is profitable.
more to life than just being happy.
So I must be profitable as well.
The word is profitable, and certainly you must.
What is being profitable, Aunt Polly?
Why, it's just being profitable, having profit, something to show for your time. What an extraordinary child you are.
Then just being glad isn't profitable?
Certainly not.
Oh dear, then you won't like it, of course. I'm afraid now that you won't ever play the game.
Game. What game?
Why, the one that Father... nothing. May I go to my room, please? I'd like to read if I may.
You do like your room, don't you? It serves you well, now that the screens are in.
Oh yes, I love my room. Even if it hasn't got the lace curtains and pretty carpets and pictures that I've
What's
been
that?
Oh, nothing truly. I didn't mean to say it.
Probably not, but you did say it, so suppose we have the rest of it?
It wasn't anything really, only that I've been kind of planning on the pretty carpets and lace curtains and pictures and things, but of course...
Planning on them?
Oh, I ought not to, Aunt Polly. It was only because I had always wanted them and hadn't had them, I suppose. Oh, I shouldn't have got to planning through the hall that first day, how pretty my room would be here, just because of all the pretty things you have, Aunt Polly. But it didn't take me long before I was being glad that the bureau didn't have a looking glass, because then it didn't show my freckles. And there couldn't be a nicer picture than the one out my window there, and you've been so good to me
That will do, Pollyanna. You have said quite enough, I'm sure.
Yes, ma'am. May I go to my room, please?
Nancy? Nancy?
Yes, ma'am?
I would like you to move my niece's things downstairs this morning, to the room directly beneath.
Move her things downstairs. You mean the one with the lace curtains and the pink bed cover and the silver looking glass on the wall?
That's the one I mean. And I'd appreciate it if it was sometime today, Nancy.
Yes, ma'am. Oh, glory.
Oh, Aunt Polly, did you mean it really? Well, that room's got everything, just everything.
Pollyanna, you just tossed that cushion on the floor. Pick it up this minute.
Yes, I know I tossed it, but you see, I couldn't help but toss it, because what I heard you say about the room.
I am gratified that you like the change, of course. But you mustn't go throwing pieces of furniture around whenever you feel the urge.
I reckon you'd throw furniture too if... Aunt Polly, haven't you ever thrown furniture?
I should hope not.
Why, what a shame.
A shame.
Yes, you see, if you'd ever felt glad enough to throw furniture, you would have done it. And since you haven't, that means you weren't ever glad enough about anything. And I'm real sorry for that.
Not glad enough.
But that's all right, because I'm glad enough for the both of us right this minute. I'm going to go help Nancy with my things. Oh, thank you, Aunt Polly.
What an extraordinary child.
Dr. Chilton here. She's still coughing. Did you try the steam treatment I recommended? Yes, and how long did you try it for? Well, then I'd better bring around some coughing syrup. It'll be about half an hour. Until then, keep her in bed and keep using the steam. It may be helping more than you know. Yes, goodbye now. Well, it's Miss Pollyanna Whittier, and how are we this morning?
I don't know much about how you are, Dr. Chilton, but I'm feeling just fine. I've come to pick up some tonic for Mrs. Snow.
Ah, so you've been round to see her again, have you?
Yes, I just brought her some cactus foot jelly. And can you believe it? She said it was just the thing she was hoping for.
No. You mean to say that she didn't ask for chicken or lamb's broth? Well, isn't that surprising news?
Yes, especially since the pastor's wife just brought her 3 jars of jelly yesterday. Dr. Chilton, I've never been in your office before, and I'm glad to say it. What are you doing with those bottles on your desk?
Ah, these are prescriptions I'm filling. Medicine to help people feel better when they're sick. I only wish I could put you into one of these little bottles.
Why, Dr. Chilton, I couldn't even fit my little toe in one of those things. Why would you want to put me in a bottle?
Because you're better than a quart-sized bottle of tonic any day. If anything or anyone can brighten up my patients, it's you. I hear that many of them happen to enjoy a very extensive personal acquaintance with you.
But I don't bring them any tonic.
Ah, but you do. It's Dr. Pollyanna Whittier's patented gladness tonic. Well, if I could prescribe that kind of medicine, well, I'd have to go into ditch digging or ribbon making for all the patients I'd have left.
Then I'm glad I can't fit my little toe in one of those things. Dr. Chilton, is this your home or just your office?
It's both, such as it is, but it's a pretty poor apology for a home. They're just rooms, that's all, not a home.
It takes a woman's hand and heart or a child's presence to make a home. My father always said that.
Pardon?
My father said it takes a woman's hand and heart. Why don't you, Dr. Chilton?
Why don't I what?
Get a woman's hand and heart.
I'm afraid they're not always to be had for the asking, little girl.
But I believe you could do it. You're not so bad looking, really, and you're almost charming.
Thank you. That's very kind of you to say so. But I'm afraid some of your older sisters would not be quite so confident. At least they haven't shown themselves to be obliging in that way.
Why, Dr. Chilton, you don't mean you tried to get someone's head and heart once and couldn't, did you?
It was a long time ago.
Was she pretty?
She certainly was.
Did she love you? Dr.
She
Chilton?
did in the beginning. At least, she said she did.
Did you love her back?
More than anything.
But why did she stop?
Stop.
Why did she stop loving you?
Well, sometimes things happen that way. You see, she lost the two people in her life that she loved the most.
The way I lost my mother and then my father?
Yes, Pollyanna, exactly like that.
She must have been very sad.
She was.
But she had you to help her through it.
No, she didn't want me anymore. It seemed that all we could do after that was quarrel.
About what?
Oh, who knows? She just wanted to be alone so that nothing would ever hurt her again. I suppose that's when she stopped loving me.
That's tragic.
I couldn't agree more.
What are you doing with those bottles?
I'm filling them for a patient. It's coughing, sir.
I've got to get the tonic over to Mrs. Snow. May I have it, please?
Sure. I've written out how much she is to take and when she is to take it. And see if you can't add some of that glad tonic of your own to my prescription, Dr. Whittier.
Yes, Dr. Chilton, sir. I think that doctoring is the very gladdest profession that there is.
Gladdest? I'm afraid to say most of the time I can't see much gladness in it. Living alone as I do and seeing so much suffering, always, everywhere I go.
But you're there to help them through it. You see, if it wasn't for you, people would just go on suffering without anyone to treat them or give them any hope. So that makes you the very gladdest of any of us, all the time.
God bless you, little girl. And I am thinking it is the doctor, as much as his patients, that need a drop of your time.
Then I'm glad Mrs. Snow needed her medicine today. Thank you, Dr. Chilton.
Thank you, Pollyanna.
It was right about this time that I came into the picture. Pollyanna had taken to bringing stray kittens and mangy dogs into Miss Harrington's house to care for, so it was only natural that she would take to me. Pollyanna was on her way home from Mrs. Snow's house. She had taught Mrs. Snow how to play the glide game. To be sure, she wasn't too good at it at first, since Mrs. Snow had been so sorry for herself for so long. But with Pollyanna being glad about most everything, Mrs. Snow was learning fast. I was feeling sort of sorry for myself that day, and I had just about made up my mind to run away from the orphan's home once and for all. And there was nothing that was going to make me change my mind. And that's when Pollyanna came along.
Hello.
Hello yourself.
Now, you don't look as if you'd even be glad for cow's foot jelly. My name's Pollyanna Whittier. What's yours?
Jimmy Bean.
Good. Now we're introduced. I'm glad you did your part. Some folks don't know how, you know. I live at Miss Polly Harrington's house. Where do you live?
Nowhere.
Nowhere? Why? You can't do that. Everybody's got to live somewhere.
Well, I've done it. Just now, I'm hunting up a new place.
Oh, where is it?
Silly, as if I'd be hunting for it if I knew.
Well, where did you live before?
Well, if you ain't beat 'em for asking questions.
I have to be, else I couldn't find out a thing about you. If you'd talk more, I wouldn't have to talk so much.
All right then, here it goes. I'm Jimmy Bean. I'm 10 years old, going on to 11. I come last year to live at the orphan's home, but they've got so many kids there. And I was never wanted. Anyhow, I don't believe. So, I've quit. I'm going to find somewhere else to live. But I ain't found a place yet. I'd like a home, just a common one, you know, with a mother in it instead of a matron. If you has a home, you has folks. And I ain't had folks since my dad died. So I'm hunting up now. I've tried 4 houses, but they didn't want me. Though I did say I expected to work. There, is that all you wanted to know, Miss Busybody?
Why, what a shame. And didn't there anybody want you? I know just how you feel, because after my father died, there wasn't anyone but the ladies' aid left. Well, until Aunt Polly said she'd take me. Oh, I know the place for you. Aunt Polly will take you. Didn't she take me? And didn't she take Fluffy and Buffy when they didn't have anywhere to go or anyone to love them? And they're only a cat and a dog. Oh, I know Aunt Polly will take you. You don't know how good and kind she is. Come with me, Jimmy Bean. Oh, Aunt Polly, I've got something for you.
Did you wipe her feet off before you came in?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you take the jelly to Mrs. Snow?
Yes, ma'am. And on the way home, I found something that's even nicer than Fluffy or Buffy for you to bring up.
What is it, Pollyanna? You know we already have more pets than we need.
Well, just look up here. It's a real-life boy.
Pollyanna, what does this mean? Who is this dirty little boy? Where did you find him?
I must have forgot to tell you, and he is a mite dirty one too, isn't he? Oh well, I'm sure he'll improve with good washing and... Oh, I forgot. This is Jimmy Bean, Aunt Polly.
Well, what is he doing here?
I just told you. He's for you.
For me? This is by far the most absurd thing you've done yet. As if tramp cats and mangy dogs aren't bad enough. Must you also bring home ragged little beggars from the street?
I ain't a beggar, Marm, and I don't want nothing of you.
Oh, I brought him, Aunt Polly. Aren't you glad?
I want to call Polly anyhow. And tell me you was so good and kind that you'd just be dying to take me in. So there.
I'm so glad. I think I'll have a good home here.
Pollyanna, will you stop using that everlasting word, glad? It's glad, glad, glad from morning till night until I think I shall go wild. Get that beggar out of my house.
Oh, Aunt Polly, I should thought you'd be glad to let me glad. Jimmy Bean, I want you to know how sorry I am.
Sorry, nothing. I ain't blaming you.
I won't give up, though. I'm sure there's somebody out there who's just hankering to get a boy like you.
Sure don't look that way.
We just gotta find the right home and the right folks. keep looking, you'll make somebody a real fine boy.
Well, I don't eat much, and I work real hard.
Silly, that's not all there is to being somebody's boy. You gotta do more than that.
Do more? Like what, Miss Knows-It-All?
Things like let him read you stories at night and tuck you into bed.
Read stories. I suppose I could let him do that. What else?
Well, if you really want to know, you gotta bring your mom flowers every now and then and go to baseball games with your pa.
Really? Baseball games?
Yes, you might even have to play catch-a-ball with him every now and then just to keep him happy.
You think I could?
I could. I believe you could do it, Jimmy Bean.
Play catchball? Huh?
Yep.
I could do all that stuff. But what your aunt said about me being a beggar, it just ain't true. I could do loads of work though.
Oh, she didn't mean a bit of what she said, but you gotta admit, you are a mite dirty.
Well, that's easy enough to see. But I ain't no beggar.